Okay, I think we're going to get started, but please get food and drink. I just want to start by saying good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for attending today's panel on AI and original thought. I'm excited about this event for many reasons, but one of those reasons is because it really combines two of our big initiatives in the FAS, civil discourse on one hand and generative AI on the other. I just want to take a moment and say, before we begin, today's session really represents an opportunity for exploring new ideas and engaging in productive dialogue. So for that reason, we ask that if there's any reporters in the room, that you identify yourself and make sure you ask permission before using any quotes from the participants. I want to start today by just saying a word of thanks. First to Chris Stubbs, who is my special advisor on generative AI, and the members of the faculty advisory committee to this initiative who helped suggest topics and panelists as part of the series. After we wrap up, if you haven't already, there's a flyer to learn more about upcoming events in this series. This is the first of a four-part series that will focus on how generative AI impacts the FAS educational mission. Future topics will include original scholarship, teaching, critical reading and writing, and preparing students for the future. So those are listed on the flyer. But as I just mentioned, today's programming is just part of a wider FAS initiative, which includes not only panel discussions, but also workshops. While today's conversation, I suspect, given our moderator, will be a little bit more philosophical in nature, at the end of the month, we'll partner with the Bach Center, the Office of Undergraduate Education, and the Office of Academic Integrity and Student Conduct to offer a faculty workshop called Teaching with Integrity in the Age of AI. So this workshop really will provide insights into potential AI-related, for example, violations in coursework, as well as, importantly, strategies to prevent them. So if you want more information about that particular upcoming workshop, you can look to the Bach Center's website. Okay, so now I'm excited to turn this over to the real stars of today, our faculty panel, who will lead us in an exploration of generative AI and how it's really shaping or reshaping academic authorship, originality, and ethical responsibility in research and teaching. So many thanks to today's panelists, which include Michael Brenner, the Michael F. Cronin Professor of Applied Mathematics and Applied Physics, as well as a professor in physics. Gary King, Weatherhead University Professor in the Department of Government, and Matthew Kopek, Program Director of Embedded Ethics and Lecturer in Philosophy. And of course, moderating today's discussion is Sean Kelly, the Teresa and Ferdinand Martignetti Professor of Philosophy and the Dean of Arts and Humanities. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sean.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hopi. I'm going to sit here so it's clear that we're all on a par. And I'm really grateful to Hopi for introducing us and kicking us off. And as she said, to Chris Stubbs for really getting us organized and helping us to understand what we might be talking about. This is very much an experiment, a pilot, and it is basically unscripted, but we have an incredible group of panelists here. And as Hopi said, the topic for today is really about sort of what generative AI pushes us to think about the nature of authorship, about the nature of originality in producing research, and about the nature of ethical responsibility. So we're going to try to focus some questions around that. The format is that we're going to have a sort of panel discussion until about 1:15, and then we're going to take a break for questions. But before we start on the panel discussion, I want to do some warm-up questions just so that you guys get a sense for what the issues are, maybe a sense for how divided we are, how lacking for a set of standards for thinking about these issues we are, just so I get a sense for where our community is. So I'm going to ask some questions. I want you to raise your hand in response to the questions. I would love the panelists to be answering for themselves as well. And then we're going to take the most controversial question, the question that divides us the most. And I'm going to ask the panelists to help us think it through. So the first question is, how many of you think that it's okay to use generative AI? And I should clarify, by generative AI, I mean these sort of chatbot tools that are available through the Harvard AI Sandbox. If you haven't discovered them yet, it's behind a Harvard key. You can get there by Googling Harvard AI Sandbox. You have these chatbots, and there's a whole range of them from different companies. You can ask them questions, test them out, see how their answers compare with one another, see how they respond in various kinds of tests. Please do that if you haven't. It's a sandbox because it's meant to play around in, and it's actually quite fun and interesting, somewhat revealing in certain cases. So is it okay to use tools like this, generative AI tools, to produce a first draft of a letter of recommendation for one of your students? Raise your hand if you think it is okay to do that. Excellent. And raise your hand if you think it's not okay to do that. Okay, I'd say 60-40. I think we're around, that's a good one. Is it okay to use generative AI to produce a referee report for a paper that you are reviewing? Raise your hand if you think it is.
First draft or the
First draft?
You need to define the terms of.
Yes. We'll use it in any way, but let's say to produce a first draft. Is it okay? Chris thinks it's our senior advisor on generative AI. Not that he has any authority on this, but it's important. Is it okay to use generative AI to grade student work in any way? Okay, no judgment here. Is it not okay to use it to grade student work? Yeah, I'm going 50-50 on that one.
What if the work is produced by AI?
That's a sub-question. We'll hold that for a moment. Is it okay to use generative AI to do an initial screening of job applications in any way? And Gary's like, what is the question here? Okay, and let me try one more. Is it okay to use generative AI to scan through a large corpus of PDF files to identify the portions of them that you would find interesting for your research? And is it not okay to do that? Whoa, okay. Excellent. All right, what was the most controversial one there, do you think? Student papers? Recommendation letters. Let's start with recommendation letters. I would like to ask the panelists who may have disagreed on this, where you came down on the question, is it okay to use generative AI to produce the first draft of a letter of recommendation? That was about 60-40, I think. That was the first question. Anyone want to take a stab at answering that question and why you think the answer that you give is right? Go ahead, Matt.
Is this on? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Sorry. So I actually had a long conversation with a colleague who said that he was doing this. So that's why I had some opinions about it. So there's some research that suggests that generative text will actually affect the tone of your responses. So a lot of the research that was done on this was done on the auto replies on text messages. So everybody knows about the auto replies where it's like, you start saying something, a person's communicating with you and you're like, they're like, oh, my grandma just died. And then the response is like, wow, exclamation point, exclamation point. You obviously don't do those things. But what they noticed in the research was that even when you don't say what the text message, what the bot is basically suggesting as an auto reply, it actually affects the tone of your response.
Got it.
So this is one of the reasons why I think everybody overuses exclamation points now. Has everybody noticed how emails from 10 years ago had no exclamation points in it? And now if you don't have an exclamation point, someone's going to check up on you and see whether or not you're depressed, et cetera. And so it actually does affect the tone. And so the tone of the letter that the bot puts out can actually affect even the changes that you make.
Yeah.
And so you're not actually giving a genuine recommendation of that individual. Your tone and your attitude about that person that comes through is actually going to be affected by what's generated in the first instance.
Just, can I ask a follow-up, and then I want to ask if anyone has a different opinion. Is it a bad thing if the tone is affected by the first draft? I mean, you always have the right and in some ways the responsibility to correct the tone so that it reflects what you feel.
So I think even when you correct it, you're going to correct it in a way that's not going to reflect what you originally would have written.
And maybe that could be an improvement, of course.
Well, it could be unfortunately too high, or it could be unfortunately too low.
Yeah.
So it's still going to affect the content of the letter.
Excellent.
And because of that, I think you're not giving an authentic recommendation of that candidate. And so I think there's something ethically problematic about that.
Excellent. Anyone want to take another side?
You want me to try? So I am against it in general, although there are specific cases where I guess it would be okay, but let me explain why I'm against it. I also think that, the good thing about aging, the only thing that's good about aging that I can tell is we acquire more data. And I just don't think people write good recommendation letters. Sorry, forget generative AI. I don't know. I mean, many of us in the room read a lot of recommendation letters. What a recommendation letter should do is, if you really know the person, is to explain what their strengths and weaknesses are in some sort of a thoughtful way with evidence from your interactions with them or your analysis of their scholarly work. And as many of us who read a lot of recommendations know, this has stopped happening as much in the academic community, to my knowledge. And, giving what are you going to do? Give them all the papers and the CV and ask it to analyze the scholarly work? Well, you're writing the letter as an expert, and that's the sense in which we tend to write letters, right? And you're supposed to be giving your opinion about the work in the context of the scholarly community. And that is something that is not generally done. And if an LLM does it, then probably the letter will be as good as many that we receive. But neither are responsive to the question. And so I am against it for that reason. The tone, I'm much less worried about the tone than about the content. I guess we all should train ourselves to normalize our tone, I would argue, and to try to look at what the evidence is for the argument being made. And is it there? What did the person actually do, for example? Anyway, and that's the sense in which I'm against it. But there's another deeper problem, frankly, which we have than generative AI, which people don't read anymore.
So I don't use generative AI to write paragraphs for me because I think I write, it's maybe egotistical, but I think I write better than the median person on the web. So if you don't, and there's lots of people here that don't, then I think you should use generative AI, and I think it's okay to do that. What do I do with it? Okay. It is actually better than almost all humans at certain things. And so I'm sort of thinking of an example here. Okay, I'm going to inflict some social science on you. I heard there was almost no social scientists. If I ask you to come up with the keywords to select, let's say, social media posts that are about healthcare policy, but not your personal healthcare. Okay, you might use the word Obamacare, you might use, right? So if we ask each of you to come up with a list of words, okay, I know from an experiment that we did that you'll come up with 7 or 8 words, and then it'll sort of peter out, okay? Across 43 undergraduates where we did this experiment, each one came up with 7 or 8 words on average. If we combine all the unique words that were meaningful, not people making things up, there were 150. That shows that each individual was defective, okay? ChatGPT can do this very, very well, okay? Was defective. You are all defective in the following way, okay? Because you're human, okay? You're defective. The psychological concept is called part list queuing. Do you know the feeling, it's on the tip of my tongue? That's not your failure to remember. That's your brain intentionally causing you to forget something. And one place where it comes up a lot is part list queuing. When you ask for all the reasons why something happens, all the words that means healthcare policy, but not healthcare. Why would your brain do that? The reason why is because if memory, roughly speaking, is an object connected to an object connected to an object, if you think banana, then you think apple, then you think orange, and everything's connected to everything else. Everything comes flowing into your short-term memory, and you fall down shaking. So there has to be inhibitory processes in your brain, and one of them happens when you're thinking of all the possible whatever, okay? You suck at coming up with all the possible whatever, okay? Because you're human, you have that defect, okay? Why the heck not? Why not use a tool that can come up with this list? Why not use it every time? In fact, don't you think it's irresponsible not to use it? Don't you think we as teachers would be irresponsible not to teach you how to use a tool like this if you didn't know how to use it?
you want to jump in? Because I have a follow-up question. I'm gonna focus that question. So I love that answer because it's provocative. And the background presupposition is that if generative AI can do something as well as I can do it, or even better, then I ought to use it. Is there any reason, if generative AI can do something as well as or better than I can in, say, pursuing a research task, is there any reason for me not to use it, given that fact?
I mean, I can give an answer, but I'm kind of with Gary on this. But I should say that I only think about things that are scientific, and I don't think about anything else. And therefore, my answer does not consider all of those cases that are outside of this narrow domain. So I just want to be clear about my answer. So, I mean, look, we're in the business of figuring out, of making discoveries to improve the world for humans. That's what we're in the business of doing. I'm putting on my scientist hat, and we should use every tool that we have at our disposal to do that. And the faster that we can go, the better it is. There, I know there are a lot of problems with that, but that's what I think. And I think my job is to train people to do that. And so they should use everything they can, which is kind of like what Gary said, as long as they're good for the task. If you use something which is defective, like Gary's description was a sense in which the generative AI is better than humans. If you use something that's defective, then you're not going to go as fast, and so you're not going to achieve this goal, and you should learn not to use it. But for example, one thing which I'm really quite interested in using generative AI for, which has been like a scourge of my life, given that I'm kind of a mathematician, is algebra. Because, I like, some of you remember, like, well, I mean, there's this thing now called Mathematica. And when Mathematica came out, we had the same discussion that, oh no, like I have these notebooks in my office. If there are any students here, I can show them to you that are filled with algebra. And most of it is wrong because I would make a mistake somewhere in the middle of the page. And then I'd have to go on the next chat back and do it. And, then Mathematica came out and it did certain little snippets of calculations. And so that was good because I didn't make mistakes, but still you can get lost in algebra. And anything that can help me with algebra, that's great. I want that. And I want the students to have that too, because they'll be better. They can try more things, so then we'll make discoveries faster.
So I mean, I had two thoughts. One is that science is less fun because of all these tools. And you have to keep in mind that like the scientist is an individual who's driven by certain kinds of goals. And oftentimes good science is done when the scientist is actually...
Can I just interject? I actually think it's more fun.
Oh, it's way more fun.
I think it's way more fun. I'm so much happier now.
Oh my gosh.
So I stand corrected. The other one is that so what was being described as like human flaws, like things that are actually like bad, that we're bad at, actually I think add to the cognitive diversity of the ideas that are sort of out in the scientific community. And I think oftentimes that kind of diversity can be very beneficial for the pursuit of science in general. And the homogenizing features of some of these tools may very well sort of like, it's true that they might be actually better at certain tasks, but there's just going to be fewer ideas out there because of some.
So that's actually a research topic in the field. And there's lots of progress being made, including by a PhD student of mine. So
let me try another follow-up on this. And I'll introduce it with a short story. Suppose I saw a student of mine running along the Charles River, and they were huffing and puffing because it's hard. They were out for a hard run. And I said, heavens, why are you running? There's a perfectly good motorized vehicle that can get you from A to B. It does it faster. It does it more efficiently. It does it better. Why don't you just use that? And the obvious answer is that he's not running to get from A to B. He's running to transform himself. He's running to change his body and his way of encountering the world. Sometimes what our students are trying to do is that. They're trying to change themselves through the process of learning various kinds of skills. And they're not just trying to get the best answer. They're trying to become the kind of person that can recognize what count as good answers. Does that affect your thought?
You can go this time. You can. Okay, I'll go. So, I mean, look, so science is arbitrarily difficult. Like we're just going to work on harder problems. Like I don't, instead of running, we're going to, whatever, you're running 6 miles, let's run 25 miles at double the speed. Like I have no problem with difficulty. So I'll just raise the difficulty. I mean, Gary, as soon as you give Gary the tool that he described, then He's just going to have the students do more harder things that they could never have done before. One more thing on this. This is a Harvard story. Frederick Mosteller, he founded the statistics department here in 1953 or something like this. He wanted to distinguish authorship on the Federalist Papers. Actually, maybe this is a good story for this moment. And so, there are these Federalist Papers, and I don't remember who wrote one and who wrote the other. Anyway, and so you know what he did? He counted the thes by hand. He took the things and he literally counted the number of thes by hand. And then he discovered Zipf's law, which was that, you can't do this with common words. And so then he started looking for uncommon words. And then, as I recall, he counted the number of while and whilst by hand. He presumably did it somewhere around here. I don't know, Gary would know. And he did it. And then he made a model to sort of discern authorship of the Federalist Papers, which was a discovery. Like, that was pretty good. So we wouldn't forget generative AI, Python. Learn Python, right? Python would solve that problem for you very quickly. And I would never tell a student anyway, I once had students compare the code running over it to his numbers, and shockingly, he got them basically correct.
He was assiduous researcher. Go ahead, Gary. Yeah.
So the question you asked is, what kind of person do you want to make yourself? Okay. One kind of person is the person that writes well, or the person that can add up long columns of numbers really well, right? 100 years ago or 200 years ago, we taught here how to add up long columns of numbers as fast as possible, all the tricks to be able to do that. We could do that now if you like. Would you like that? Mm-hmm. Right? How about you just never learn that? But you understand, of course, you have to understand what's happening when a long column of numbers is being added up like that, and the column is 1 trillion long, okay? And are you happy that we don't teach you that anymore? I'll give you one more example. The first mathematics books had long passages trying to explain how to do mathematical calculations without wasting valuable paper. Isn't that cool? Right? Most of us now spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to do calculations without blowing up our computer system, right? Or taking 50 years to run the thing. It's almost the same thing, but it's completely different technology. Do you want to be the kind of person that can solve that problem? We can teach that to you. Okay, so I think you should be the kind of person that uses whatever the best tools are to make the next set of progress.
So I have to confess at this moment that I use these generative AI tools almost every day for large portions of the day. So I am actually a bit playing devil's advocate, but I do think there's a theme that's arising from the fact that the kinds of questions that you guys are talking about are really effectively mechanical kinds of questions. How many whilsts are there in this document? I don't want to sit down. That is the boring kind of research. The exciting stuff is what you get to conclude from the facts that you've got, and that's interesting. But let me give you a different kind of question. Suppose the question isn't how many whilsts are there in these documents, but what role does Macbeth's o'ervaulting ambition play in his downfall, according to Shakespeare? That feels like a question you could explore by asking the generative AI to sort of give you some options, but it doesn't feel like it's automatically going to do the work for you. It's not going to make your job like a lot different than it would have been otherwise. Is that fair?
But we don't know. Okay, conceptualization is something that we think is ours and not computers. That's false. We have computer systems, statistical systems that helps humans conceptualize. Not everything, probably not that, but could you be helped by doing that? My guess is the reason you're using it every day is that you're helped, right?
I love listening to its answers and trying to figure out what's wrong with them, or how they make me think different things about what I ought to be exploring. I think that's for the humanities, for me, that's the use. It sort of spurs you to further creative thoughts that you might not have had if you didn't have this response.
I mean, the great thing about ChatGPT is that it convinced folks in the humanities to use a technical innovation. Yeah. Okay, I think there's lots of claims in the humanities in particular, including your incredibly eloquent letter that you sent out recently, that are amenable to social science study. Okay, the humanities, for example, are always saying we're in crisis, okay, because what we do is very important, I hereby declare with no evidence. and we're not being funded or whatever it is. How about you let bring some social scientists in. We can work very closely with you to really understand what the contribution is, and we can validate that, provide empirical evidence of it. It isn't a very specific scientific empirical claim that you're making. Yeah. Why not use what's being taught all around the university in different parts? I mean, that's the great thing about ChatGPT, right?
I think it's awesome. And I will say there are humanists in the room who have built big databases to build taxonomies of story themes or of bibliographical names in ancient Chinese literature, and they're using them to explore various things. I think that area of digital humanities is very rich, and it's something that, we could benefit. I would love to bring the humanists together with the social scientists and the computer scientists to work on that. Matt, do you want to jump in, or you're feeling good?
Oh, no, well, the only thing I'd caution is just that as long as the user understands that the model doesn't really care whether what it's putting out is true or false, then I think that's fine. But I think a lot of people actually don't have that in mind when they're using these tools. Yeah. So I'm not sure if anybody else like consulted one of these tools for medical advice. You can hear people doing this all the time. And so as long as that's always in the back of your mind that like this model doesn't care whether what it just told me is true or false, then I think that's fine. Yeah.
Have you ever consulted a doctor about medical advice? Half of all medical advice is not taken by the subject. Most people get medical advice from their Uncle Sal. So having an Uncle Sal that can answer really fast and is right 80% of the time, that's probably a positive contribution. Yeah. Check. Check.
but Sal cares about whether or not the advice is true. And I think that matters.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean Sal got it right. Right.
It's true. Let me ask a different question. I want to come at it from a different direction, because it feels as though we haven't got all of a sudden everyone's all enthusiastic about it. So are there any reasons for caution? So let me ask two forms of that question. If the use of generative AI becomes ubiquitous among researchers, can you think of any widespread harms that it might cause? And can you think of, the second question, any ways in which it could degrade the research being produced in your field instead of improve it?
Yeah, I can think of harms. So I'm kind of bullish on the whole thing. And I think it's pretty scary to have machines that can do what I was describing. Like, who's going to control these machines? Sorry, I'm not exactly alarmist, but I think it would be naive not to be concerned. There's a lot of things that require that the reason that they don't have bad things that could happen, that the reason that they don't happen is because expertise is required. Well, if we lower the barrier of that expertise, then it's a real problem. So I think there's a real problem. Like, my enthusiastic answer was from my point of view as a scientist trying to create knowledge, that's my job. That's what I'm trying to do. But, but there's that's one thing. And the second thing is, I guess I want to be very careful about the way I at least think about it. And again, I'm very focused on only scientific things and very focused on pushing research forward. So I think, and I know this is not in scope today, but I will just say it. I think this is the first technology that I've seen since I started teaching that has the potential to raise the level of our classes, as opposed to lower the level of classes. That is, to make them harder for reasons that are associated with what I just said. And I'm basically actively trying to do this. On the other hand, and I don't know if this will make sense, I don't teach people the chain rule. I'm not in the business of teaching things that are elementary. They should know it by the time they come and talk to me. And I have absolutely no idea how we're going to teach the chain rule or whatever the analog of that is to you, because the students can just go ask the machine that can spit out the answer, and then we don't actually understand if they actually understood. And this has a real possible harm to generating knowledge. Right? That is because the students they're the ones that's why we're here, right? We're training them. And I'm really very worried about this, and I have no idea what to do, but I'm not focused on that problem.
Anyone else?
So, yes, this technology can be used for harm. Any technology can be used for harm. The causal factor isn't the technology, it's the humans deciding to use it for the wrong purpose. Have you ever seen the John F. Kennedy's speech about the moon? He said, we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. You know this, right? Watch that speech to the end, okay? In addition to it's always nice to hear a Boston accent, because at Harvard you almost never hear one. But go to the end of the speech. At the end of that speech, he talks about technology and science, and he says, look, science and technological innovations can be used for bad things, and they can be used for good things. What we're going to do as Americans is we're going to be at the cutting edge always, so we get a say in when they're used for good things and bad things, right? Which basically means we're not going to outlaw hammers, despite the fact of what we could do with hammers, or any other technology. Don't blame it on the technology. Blame it on yourself if you don't understand everything that could be done with that technology.
So I think a lot of the negative effects are going to be kind of insidious, and these are all social science questions. So, for example, the bar for getting like a publishable sounding paper created has decreased, drastically. So that then means that the cost associated with actually getting a paper into publishable quality and submitting it to a journal has gone way down, which I assume means that the number of submissions to journals are going to go way up. Which means there's referees are going to have less time, So I think a lot of similarly with grants. So if anybody's written a grant in the audience, so if you've ever written a grant, you know that a lot of it is just sort of like tedious work, And so if you're going to put a grant together back in the olden days, it's like you really had to care about the research questions, right? You were putting a lot of work in. Now you can just sort of like have ChatGPT crank it out. So now the granting agencies are going to be overwhelmed with like applications. A lot of them are going to seem exactly the same because everybody's using these tools. Yeah. So a lot of those, I think there's going to be a lot of insidious effects of the overuse of these tools.
Let me ask about one of the possible insidious effects, because there's an issue of what kind of ethical responsibility we have in using these tools. So it could happen, I think arguably it has happened and does happen, that some of these AI tools are trained on data that's unethically obtained. So for instance, the material that it used was under copyright. Maybe it was obtained through hacking. It was obtained illegally. Is it ethical for us still to use the tools that were trained on that data that was unethically obtained? What responsibility do we have as users of these tools? And what responsibility does our institution have in thinking about how the faculty and the students should use those tools?
Particularly since we're the authors of a lot of that stuff, right? I don't know the answer to the question, but.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question either. That's a hard question.
Does the philosopher have something?
I was hoping that they would give us something to work with. There was a study that came out recently about the image generation bots that were trained on data sets that had child pornography in it. So if that's a possibility, what obligation do we as researchers have if we're using these tools to ensure that like the model wasn't trained on that sort of stuff? Yeah. So I think there is a serious ethical obligation, but I'm not.
Well, I mean, one problem is that I'm not sure we know what they were trained on. Do we? I mean,
sometimes that's proprietary.
So I mean, yeah, it's kind of, we don't know, I think, for many things. And so then what are we supposed to do? I don't, you're the philosopher. I don't know what we're supposed to do.
I mean, I think, in practice, it's not well, maybe this is always true. In practice, it's not a philosophical question. It's sort of tautologically true. It's a legal and policy question, and your philosophical, ethical issues will inform that, as will practical issues and financial issues, and it'll be battled out, and we'll watch, and
As a practical question, though, knowing that it's a possibility that the tools you're using were trained on this unethically obtained stuff, does it give you pause? Does it make you think, maybe I shouldn't use it?
It doesn't make me think that, but that might mean I'm a bad person.
Would it give you pause to know that some of the nice, don't let Hopi listen to this, to know that some of the nicest things you could say about our oldest donors is that they were really nice to their slaves? I mean, if that's true, let's say hypothetically. I mean, there's a lot of things to worry about. I'm not saying you shouldn't. Go for it.
But like we as a society decided that all the, science that came out of Nazi Germany was going to be discarded and not, So yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I'm not sure this is has the same level, but I take your point.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's leave that as a clearly unanswered question and as one that maybe we should think about, maybe one that in our community we don't have an obvious answer to yet. I would feel better if we did, if we knew whether we were doing something terrible by using these tools or not. Feels like that's something we ought to push on. But I think it's interesting that we really don't know. Let me try a slightly different one. Plagiarism. A lot of the cases that come before the Honor Council, certainly cases that gain prominence in the research community, are cases where someone's done some unethical form of plagiarism. But our conception of what counts as plagiarism now is maybe not as clear as it used to be, because plagiarism is when you use someone else's work without attributing it to them and sort of claiming it as your own. And it's not even clear what it would be to claim these kinds of work. Who are you attributing it to? Does our conception of what counts as plagiarism change? And if so, and how do we deal with that?
Let's see, I'll try. So there are two types of, let me sort of distinguish two categories of plagiarism. I'm sure there's more. There's plagiarism in scholarly work. There's plagiarism of things turned in our classes. So let me do the last one, because that's easier for me to think about. So I assume in my classes, and I in fact encourage everyone to use everything they can. I've always done this. And so now please use whatever generative AI you can. So this semester, something kind of odd happened. I'm teaching a graduate applied math class, and the weekend before, I started plugging in the problems at the end of the class into the chatbots that I had around and discovered that they could basically do them. And I was quite shocked, actually. I knew what was happening. I knew a lot about what's happening, and I was quite shocked. This was sort of solving the asymptotic behavior of a nonlinear partial differential equation. If anyone is interested, like I can show you. I was just shocked, and I was like, oh no, now what do I do? And I had on the syllabus of my class, which I've always done, I've taught this class for a while, that there would be a take-home exam, about now, in a little bit in the class. And so then I walked in and said, I'm very sorry, you can use this tool. Here it is, please use it. And we did various things to the class, but there will be no take-home exam, because I can't give you a take-home exam. And so then I gave the students a poll. So I'm eliminating plagiarism. So this is what I'm trying to say. I'm addressing your question because let's just get rid of it, basically. Let's get rid of the possibility. So then I basically, now how am I going to evaluate the students? Because I have a responsibility to the university to check that people understand something. And so I have to figure this out. And so I gave them two options. I gave the class two options. I said, either you can have a in-class exam on paper, or I will give you an oral exam subject to the following rules. And there are 60 students in the class. The second one scared me quite a bit. And so guess what? I don't know, just out of curiosity, guess what percentage, what did the students choose? Our students, these are graduate students. What did they choose? What do you think, paper? 77% chose the oral exam. So now I have to actually do something that I've never done in my 25 years of teaching at Harvard, which I should do. I know I've always said should have done, which I should actually talk to them about whether they understand. Which seems like it's better. And it's all because of plagiarism.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's why. So I don't know. But the scholarly thing is complicated, and I talked long enough. So I'll let someone else answer that.
Excellent. Matt, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concept needs to change because, like, the fact that you're not taking words directly from some individual. So that was sort of like one of the hallmarks of plagiarism back in the day. And now you can essentially copy the style and the feel of somebody's work, seamlessly without putting any work of your own in. So I think it does have to change. One of the things that we talked about with one of the classes that we're teaching over across the river was there's a software engineering course where the whole thing is teaching you how to use generative AI. And there's a question about, like, can you use the same prompt as somebody else? Can you copy that prompt verbatim? Because that's not going to show up in the actual output of whatever you create. But if
it doesn't create the same thing in response.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because it's a stochastic model. So the fact that two things look, totally different, they can still be coming from exactly the same prompt, and the instructor won't know. It does. I think we need to rethink things a little bit.
Yeah, excellent. Gary, any thoughts on plagiarism?
I don't know. So it goes in the same category as like scientific fraud, right? First of all, I don't so much like bringing people up on charges when what they did is sort of break into Fort Knox and steal a pencil. Like we just don't need to do that. Teaching, I think, my summary of the entire education literature is the more you put in, the more you get out. That's pretty much it, right? And so if we're judging people based upon like 3 sentences that are exactly the same, it's just like it's not a good measure of the more you put in. And so therefore it's not a good measure of the more you get out. It's just sort of irrelevant. So yes, they should follow the norms. They should understand the norms. There's consequences for not doing that. But mostly it's on us. Like the work Michael put in, like at the last minute, was probably really annoying, right? But this is on us. When things change, I think that's for us to figure out.
Yeah. Excellent. Let's open it up. Thank you very much for all those answers. I think that was exciting. Let's open it up for the last 15 minutes or so to questions from the audience. You can ask your question to the panelists at large, or to any particular one of them, given what you've seen them say. Yeah, and great. So we're going to have a microphone going around.
Thank you. I just want to go back to that analogy that you had about the person running and the person taking the car. I think there's a part of that analogy that really was glossed over, which is the environmental impact of using these tools. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
You mean just the amount of energy it takes to get these computers running? Yeah.
And water.
Water.
I agree that that's a problem.
Does anybody have to hand the facts about that? I mean, I know they use a lot of energy. That's what we hear, but.
When you train a large language learning model, it takes about 2 weeks and uses it generates as much carbon dioxide as the entire lifetime of, I think, like a dozen cars, something like a dozen gas vehicles.
Train one LLM.
Yeah, and the training might not guarantee successful. That's to try it once. It might fail, it might be a totally horrible product. You have to keep doing that in order to produce something like ChatGPT-4.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that there's disagreement amongst the scholarly community about exactly how much energy you're using per time you use the actual model, and a lot of the energy is actually used in the training. But it is like overall widespread use of these tools are going to have a massive environmental impact.
Yeah. So it's one of those cases where it's true that you had to kill a lot of people to get this thing working, but you don't kill any more to use it. So that might be okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one would hope that in all things, like the compute requirements decrease over time with things achieving the same level of performance. This has historically been true, but I don't think this addresses your question. So it does not address the crux of your question. But it is true that one would hope that it would get better, but that's not an answer. So.
But before you single-handedly eliminate these incredibly useful tools, let's just figure out the costs and the benefits, right? Yeah. I mean, probably the entire energy production of the world is going to increase, and pretty much all progress is a function of that one bottleneck. So it might ruin the environment, but it might also generate whole new industries of clean energy, or maybe not.
Excellent. Yes, go ahead.
I want to ask a different
If you could just say your name.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Helpful. Yeah. And
Liz Lundbeck, History of Science. A different ethical question, educational question. So what do any of you make of the research, some of it put out by Microsoft, that shows there's a relationship between trust in AI and decreased cognitive load on the part of the user? So my question is, what does this mean for what we're doing in the classroom? So Sean, when you talk about you're using it all day and you're thinking about different now, you have had a lifetime so far of immersion in text, print, hard learning. My worry is that our students, and I've seen this, their learning is this deep when they're using the AI tools. So they don't have the discriminative abilities, capacities that you have developed in a lifetime. They're using the tools and decreasing their thinking, the cognitive load. So it kind of leads to the question, what are we doing? so I understand the science view, and I'm all for using the tools in ways, but Gary, you raised the math, the long and columns, and you raised the question of writing, but didn't address it. And I would say a lot of the writing is really not good. So I've asked a lot of different questions here, but I think the question about cognitive capacity, load, demand, which is what college should be focused on, it's the running question.
Can I try this one? Sorry.
Go ahead.
So I mean, listen, so we are actors here. That is you. We are all of us are actors in this drama, basically. So I completely agree with what you said. This is what I was trying to say in my own word when I said I don't know who's going to teach anyone the chain rule, right? Like that is, how are we going to teach people to use the tool as Sean does? Like, it's one thing when a sophisticated person uses it because they've gone through their lifetime, but meanwhile, we're supposed to be educators, and so we have to solve this problem. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, this is the problem that we're faced with, so we must figure out how to solve it. And I don't know the answer. I mean, I told you I'm giving people oral exams now for the first time in my life. Well, because I tend to teach very large classes, so I haven't done it, basically. But like, we have to figure out what is the way to, impose the cognitive load that is required on our students for them to be able to use the Gen AI like Sean does, or whatever metric you want. And we must solve this problem. And we should really be leading the world here, I think. Like, I think this should be I would argue this should be a goal, actually, to solve this problem, and to be very clear-eyed about what the problem is that we're solving, and evaluating ourselves using social science methods as to whether or not we're actually doing it correctly. Because I think it's a really, really, really important problem.
So I completely agree. And I think we should do a study of what you're describing. The issue, it's not necessarily bad that people are thinking differently and using these tools affects people's brains. Learning every new tool affects people's brains. We want to know what the consequence of that is. Are they prepared for the next level? We're no good at arithmetic anymore. We don't need to be. In fact, there isn't any good, compelling reason to make people be good at arithmetic. They're not good at a lot of things that they used to be good at. I don't think that's been bad. I think that's probably a good thing. It frees up our very limited cognitive capacity for other things. But you're absolutely right. What direction are we going in? I think we have to pay really close attention to that. I don't think the answer is obvious. It could be really bad, but it might be really good.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to add that students, and there's research that was conducted here, students are bad at knowing what's good for them. So they interpret the increased cognitive load as somehow the instructor's doing something wrong. And when things actually are just come through very easily, right? Students are like, oh, I must be learning all this material. And then they actually get to the problem set, or they actually get to the homework, and they can't complete the task. And so trying to recreate your courses so that they're imposing this kind of cognitive load, unless everybody's doing it, you're going to end up getting like worse evaluations and things like that.
Yeah.
Because the students are actually going to think that the difficulty that you're imposing upon them is not good for them, but it actually is.
And I'll just say, Liz, I mean, when I think about what drives me to use it and why that might be different from what students would want, like what drives me to use it is just I have this kind of problem where questions are on my mind all the time. I just can't help it. And it's, that's why I am where I am. My wife is so happy I'm not constantly asking her those questions now. Everything goes much better at home. I mean, what do you think about the Neapolitan conservatories in the 17th century? She doesn't want to have a thought about that, but ChatGPT does. And part of what we're doing when we're teaching, I think, maybe I have too much of that, but we're teaching our students to care about questions that are meaningful. And part of the problem, part of the danger, I think, here is that they will use it without that motivation. They'll use it to take a shortcut, to get an answer to a question. And so I think it does mean that in our teaching, we have to pay attention to the fact that we're trying to mold people into people who care about important things. And if we can do that, that's very complicated. Who knows what that is? I don't know what the social science says about how you do that. But I feel like good teachers do end up doing that. It's not just that we teach the students a bunch of facts or even a bunch of skills. We teach them that feeling of like having been exposed to something that's worth loving. And if we can focus on that in our teaching, I think they're more likely to use the tools in something more like the way I do.
Thank you for the discussion. I'm Nicola. I'm a senior at the college doing a special concentration in AI and society. My question is more like a longer term question, by which I mean like 5 years. So many of the CEOs of these AI companies are like on the record saying that they expect to create human level AI within 5 years, like by the end of the decade. And like some of them have said that like decades or centuries of scientific progress might happen in years after this, as like most science will be authored by AI. Are we ready for this, for like most of science to be done by AI, like all the dual use technologies? And yeah, how can we prepare?
I mean, I think don't trust the CEOs necessarily, because there's a massive conflict of interest. I'm sure there will be some leaks soon that we'll hear about, that the hype that they're creating around some of these tools are kind of like, that was purposeful and strategic. So, yeah.
But go ahead.
Well, no, I don't think we're ready. So I agree with the comment, don't trust what you hear on wherever you hear it. But I do think this is transformative. I mean, and I think it's transformative for basically the reason that Gary described at the very beginning, that it essentially allows automation of ordinary work, which takes a lot of time, and it basically frees up for asking higher level questions. And I don't see how this won't accelerate things in the fields that I care about. I mean, I think most of the work when I think back on my scientific career and I think what work was I doing, a lot of it was ordinary work, right? It was like, it was just, in fact, most of it, there was very little that wasn't ordinary work. And the question of whether or not if you could accelerate that, what that would do, I have no idea what that will do. Like claims about 10 years of progress, that I can't evaluate, I don't know. But I can just tell you that like when these tools are going to transform the way that people in the fields that I work in work, and to the extent that we're producing things that are valuable or not valuable, then that will accelerate. For that reason, one would hope. I don't think we're ready for it. That is, I'm not as alarmist. I don't think we're ready for it. I think that, this gets back to like, the comment I made before about like and also the comment that I think Gary made about like, it's not the tool, it's do we understand how to think about the people that are using the tools? Like there are things that you can do scientifically that would cause harm, and that right now it is difficult to do because it requires a lot of knowledge and a lot of ordinary work, right? And to the extent that these things can be automated and made easier, the bar can be lowered, then that is scary. And we need to figure out how to deal with it. And even if it turns out that the prognostications are not as dramatic as are being, what happens is not as dramatic as what the prognostications are, which is inevitable. But even if it's like some fraction of that, this is still a critical problem that needs to be addressed.
It's also worth thinking positive just for a second, right? The amount of knowledge learned in the world and GDP per capita has been pretty much constant for the last 2 million years. The graph, well, the way you're looking at it, the graph looks, oh no, sorry, the way you're looking at it, the graph looks like this. Let's do GDP per capita over 2 million years. It's flat until about the time Harvard was founded, although it's not causal. And it starts to go like this. And the coolest thing in the world is that you get to live on this gradient, on this slope. Okay, maybe in your lifetime we'll be able to make life in a laboratory, or discover life on other planets, or cure the disease that unfortunately you might get when you're 87, right? I mean, I'd rather that happen in your lifetime rather than your grandkids' lifetime. Like the fact that things are speeding up right now is the best thing that could possibly happen to all of us. Yeah, it could also be the worst thing, absolutely, and we should focus on those things along the way, but don't lose sight of the positive.
Other questions? No other questions. There may still be some food at the back if anyone has hunger after this conversation. Let's thank our panelists. I think this was a fantastic conversation.